Hi, my name is Karen, and I'm an American lay student of Ajahn Suchart, or Ajahn Suchart Abhijato, who's given me his permission to read his books to you for free. Ajahn Suchart's books and talks are always free. Any ads you may see or hear in this recording have been put there by the platform you are using to listen or view with for its own revenue, in exchange for letting us use their platform for free. Please forgive me for any mispronunciations of names or words and for any background noises, as I'm just making these recordings in my apartment with an unruly dog and in the middle of a city. We are continuing on reading Beyond Birth, Ajahn Suchart Abhijato, an autobiography from December of 2021, and we are in the first chapter, resuming on page 26. And the title of this subsection is called My Beginning. I was born on Sunday, November 2, 1947, year of the pig, fourth waning moon, in the 11th month of the lunar year, at St. Louis Hospital, Saturn Road. At that time, my father was renting a house by the Saturn Pier. But then he had an opportunity to work as a cook at Hat Yai in Songkhla province. Later on, he moved to Tan Yong Mat in Narathiwat province, where he sold kanji near the train station. His move happened about the time I was born, so my father sent my mother and me to live with my grandmother in Suphanburi for a short while. Then we moved south. I lived and attended preschool in Tanyang Ma until I was 4, when my father sent me back to live with my grandmother long term, because both my parents were working and didn't have time to care for me. When my parents entrusted me to my grandmother, she raised me as if I was her child, so I did not feel deprived. I came to see her as a parent. I was the grandchild who stayed with her the longest, because the other children all had places of their own to stay, leaving just me and my aunt with Grandma, for a total of 3 people living at her place at that time. At that time, my grandmother no longer sold coffee, but there were still some snacks for sale. She made and sold Chinese specialties, such as kanam goi, desserts, and bajang, dumplings. She occasionally sold cakes of the type you'd offer at a Chinese festival. They would make them together, the dumplings or whatever else would sell. I was still a child and couldn't help with anything. As far as I can remember, I would mostly go play, not yet knowing how to do these things. While living in Suphanburi, I spoke with the rural accent of the local people there. I lost my accent only after coming to study in Bangkok. And the next subsection begins on page 30, entitled Growing Up. As a child, I played childhood games just like the other kids. I would swim in the river. At first, I didn't know how to swim, but after training, I learned how. At that time, the kids would like to wait for a towboat to come, and then they would cling on to it as it passed. The towboats were loaded with rice. They didn't sail very fast then. I would swim out and grab onto a rope. When there came a train of barges going back, I'd cling to that to come back. Some of my friends liked to fish and shoot at birds, which I never participated in because I always felt bad about killing. However, I did play card games, though not with money. We'd use cigarette packs as fake money, Gold City cigarettes, gold leaf, the moon. We'd grab them out of the trash, fold them up neatly, decide on their value, and then gamble together. Another favorite game was Lord Toke's House, a game where coins were rolled down a sloped piece of wood to see whose would roll down the farthest. The person who rolled the farthest coin would then throw his coin on the others and collect the coins if he hit them. As far as I can recall, when I was a kid, playing or doing whatever, I was never the one calling the shots. I would just join others. I didn't play in large groups, usually just 2 or 3 neighbors. The next subsection begins on page 31, entitled The Cost of Sweets. That period in Suphanburi was a leisurely time, but one doesn't like to stay idle. I wanted to earn some money of my own to buy sweets. My parents didn't send any money, and at that time, my grandmother didn't have the money for desserts. She gave me just enough money to get to school, 50 satang, Thai cents, per day. I wanted more than that, so I had to find work for myself. So I found a way to make money. At 5 a.m., I would get Chinese fritters to go sell before school. Then on the weekends, I would get steamed buns and lottery tickets to sell at the market. I earned extra money not because I really needed to, but just so that I would be able to buy extra treats. My grandmother also didn't have much money then, so she had to be very frugal with her money. Sometimes, when I wanted to buy kway teow, noodle soup, to eat, no matter how much I begged her, she would instead ask me to eat khao tom, boiled rice soup, and chop chai, Thai vegetable stew, at home. I therefore had to look for money myself. So when I heard that one could earn money by selling pa tang go, Chinese fritters, I went ahead to look for work for extra money. But I wasn't pressured or forced to do anything. I did it willingly and happily. During the vegetarian festival, I would wear all white, and my grandmother would take us out for food and to watch Chinese opera every day during those 7 days of the festival. At that time, if I wanted to watch a movie, I would go and stand in front of the theater and ask someone to take me in. Some would, and others who did not know me would not. Whenever that happened, I was a bit disappointed, but always reminded myself that I could try again tomorrow. My life went on like this, just trying to survive, though never stealing or doing anything immoral like that. The next subsection begins on page 33, entitled Learning to Read and Write. My education started at Samaki Suksa School, a Thai private school near our house and the market in Suphanburi. In the first grade, I remember that we used to go to the temple, because every observance day, the teacher would take us to listen to a Dhamma talk, and we would observe the precepts. Nowadays, this type of activity no longer exists due to the influence of materialism and the delusion of finding happiness from worldly possessions. I started first grade again at a Chinese school which taught both Chinese and Thai. The teacher taught us to write Chinese with brushes, and at that time I could write as well as speak Chinese. Nowadays, I can no longer speak Chinese, though I can still understand something when I hear it spoken. When I moved to this new school, I no longer went to the temple, because our family did not really participate in any religion. My father did not believe in religion, though he did make merit. He gave alms to the monks who came by, and would always help those in need if they asked for it. My father appeared as if he had no religion, because he never went to the temple, nor did he ever take his family there. Later on, my parents moved from the south of Thailand to work in North Pattaya, because my mother's older brother was a contractor for the water system in Pattaya, and had convinced my parents to move there too. My father learned the construction business from carpentry to cement work, and ended up building resort homes for people from Bangkok. Once in Pattaya, they brought me back from Suphanburi to live with them. My younger sister, Kalaya Ryungtanasan, was born 9 years after me in 1956 at Wat Yannasangwararam Hospital, delivered by the doctor with whom my mother used to work. My sister grew up in Pattaya with my parents, going to St. Paul Convent School, then later attending Assumption School in Sriracha. She entered Chulalongkorn University the same year as HRH Princess Mahachakri Sinandorn. I had just completed 3rd grade at the Suchart Chinese school when I moved to Pattaya. Fortunately, this was during a school break. At that time, my father had yet to decide where I should study next. As luck would have it, he got to know a teacher from Bangkok who was then staying at a rental house that my father had built for vacationers. The teacher suggested that I study at a school in which he was teaching, where lessons were taught in English. My father, who generally had a clear vision of what might be beneficial for my future, thought that it would provide me with better opportunities in the future. So he decided to send me to the Seventh-day Adventist Ekamai School at Soi Ekamai in Bangkok. The next section begins on page 39, and it is entitled Seventh-day Adventist Ekamai School. Normally, for parents to send a child to the Seventh-day Adventist Ekamai School for the first time, they would have to pay an admission fee. But since I was recommended by a teacher as a special case, I entered the school in 1958 without having to pay that fee. Having no background in English before, I had to enter the school at grade 1 again, even though I would have normally entered 5th grade. That was not unusual for students entering the school, however, and there were several other older students entering the 1st grade with me, so I didn't feel out of place. After the 1st year, I skipped to grade 3. At the end of grade 3, the school was having a problem with the Ministry of Education, as it was not properly registered with them. The Seventh-day Adventist Ekamai School started out as an American-style school that educated only the children of the Seventh-day Adventists and the missionary doctors who worked at the mission hospital. It was not legally registered. Later on, other foreigners and Thais began to hear about the school. As more students started to enroll, the Ministry of Education came to investigate and found that the school was not properly registered, so they had to close it down. I cannot remember how long it was closed, but it was eventually reopened as a vocational school. I remember that before the school registered with the government, it was a half-day school, and we were more like an international school where we had no uniform, with only one class per grade level. After becoming a vocational school, we had full days and had to wear a uniform of white shirts and navy blue slacks. Boys and girls were separated into different classes of about 20 students each. We still came together to play games and sports during lunch and break times. We used to see each other in the same class every day and were familiar with almost everyone. Because the school had stopped for so many months, when it reopened, I was placed into the 6th grade. Since my learning progress had really reached the 7th or 8th grade at that point, skipping to grade 6 was not that difficult, except for the language proficiency part. The Ministry of Education required all students at the school to write and speak Thai, at least at 4th grade level. The school provided tutors during lunch hour for a year to help us pass the exam, which we took at Amnue Silpa School. The teachers at the school had us buy Time and Reader's Digest magazines to help us keep up with current events and other subjects. I have always loved to read and would pick up books to read and did much learning on my own. On page 41, there is a lovely photo of Ajahn with his classmates at the school he's talking about. And there's a quote that says, "I had to start in the 1st grade again at this school. Compared to other children, I started school at an older age because I had to repeat the 1st grade 3 times." On page 42, there is another quote. "When I looked at it, it was like bringing up an old memory that said, 'This is the truth.' This knowledge was buried deep in my mind, resurfacing as a reminder here and there, though it never made me lose the will to live. No, it was like having a vaccine to protect me. At that time, if I were to lose my parents, I would probably have felt sad, but it wouldn't get to the point where I would lose sleep over it. It was like I already knew ahead of time, so my mind wouldn't be disturbed. The next section is on page 43, begins on 43, and is titled First Experience with Contemplation of Death. When I was 12, I attended a funeral at the Seventh-day Adventist Church for a classmate's brother who drowned while studying in the U.S. We did not know any details about his death, but his body was brought back for the funeral because he was an Adventist. The funeral was open casket, and it was the first time I ever saw a corpse. It was not actually scary, because the body was dressed in a suit and tie. His face was touched up, so he looked more like a mannequin or a doll. My observation at that event was that this is how we would all end up one day, even my parents. All those that we love and care about would end up the same way. My eyes were open to this fact without being taught. Growing up, nobody introduced the concept of death or even talked about it. When I saw the corpse, my thoughts connected with the concept of mortality, that my father and mother must eventually die. Everyone we love will also die. My thought led to realization and acceptance of this truth. It stayed with me, even though it did not make me feel depressed or prevent me from carrying out my duties to study and work. It has always stayed in the background as a reminder that we will all die one day. Actually, such lessons should be learned in advance, because if you just let things be without anyone to teach you, then you'll definitely not come to think of it. For me, maybe I had practiced the recollection of death regularly and continuously before. My mind prefers solitude and doesn't like to get involved and familiar with others. This temperament has stuck with me and become automatic. When I looked at the corpse, it didn't make me feel sad or anything. I looked at it with wisdom, seeing that that was all there is to a body. At that time, I did not know anything about the mind or how to separate it from the body. I only knew that all bodies would eventually reach this point. I was still afraid of the thought of death, but knowing that we would all die one day helped me to not worry about other people. These mental images stayed with me and kept reminding me that eventually I would have to part with all the people that I knew and loved. The next section begins on page 45, titled, Who Can Forgive Our Sins? At the Seventh-day Adventist Ekamai School, students had to agree to go to church every Saturday. Since the school had no chapel, we went to the one at the mission hospital near Sapan Khao. So while studying at the school, I learned the Christian faith and went to church. At church, I listened to stories such as how God created the world and other biblical stories. I was absorbing them continuously. Also, at that time, any student who applied and became an Adventist would be granted a special privilege by the school to pay lower tuition. I thought it was a good deal, and therefore decided to apply. That year, I was around 15 or 16 years old. After I applied, the school had someone come up to teach me the Christian way. When it was time to be baptized as a Seventh-day Adventist, he asked me, "Are you ready?" I answered, "I am not quite ready yet." He then asked, "Why not?" And I answered, "Deep down, I'm not convinced about Jesus forgiving our sins. How would he know what we have done? It makes no sense, and I can't accept it. The sins are ours, and who can really forgive us for our sins?" In the end, I did not join. Some of my friends did join the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and others were already of the faith because of their family. I studied a bit about Christianity, so I was familiar with the teachings. They teach the three virtues of giving, having compassion for everyone, and following the commandments. They believe that we can all be saved from our sins by believing in Jesus Christ because he is the Son of God. If we want to be with God on Reckoning Day, when Jesus returns to earth to forgive us our sins, we have to believe Jesus when he said that our death is only temporary. This is why Christians do not cremate their dead, but bury them, to wait for the day Jesus will come back to take them up to be with God forever after. However, before Jesus can come back, all Christians must spread this news to everyone in the world, because only believers will be resurrected and go to heaven, but non-believers will be permanently burned. This is their goal. So there are Christians who go around disseminating the teachings to hill tribe peoples and in remote areas because they have to spread the word to everyone. When I heard of this tenet, I found it somewhat unbelievable and unreasonable. However, the virtues in the 10 Commandments, which forbid things like adultery, or the ideal to have compassion and to help those in need, these are Christian ideas that I can appreciate and believe in. And we're going to end there today on page 46 and begin the next section that will start on page 47, which is titled Learning to Take Responsibility for Myself. I'll see you next time with Metta. Bye-bye.